This is the Creative Soulpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Demas. Let's go. Renee, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we were sitting at a business conference that we were at recently, and you were at a table with some ladies talking, and I sat down and I was listening to what you were saying, and I was like so interested. It was just so interesting that I was like, oh, I need you on the podcast.
Yes.
And I've known you for a bit, but like, I don't know, there was something there that really clicked for me. I have a primarily female audience. And this is something that I don't know if they're talking about, or if they are, it's not happening in front of me. And I thought I've got to bring you on to chat about it. So without further ado, why don't I have you introduce yourself, tell us what you do, who you serve, and those questions.
Yes. So my name is Renee Fieck. I am a mom of 3. I always start with that, but it's kind of weird. But I am an occupational therapist that serves women who really like helping them up level their game and their life and their business by tapping into their menstrual cycle. So that is a big part of like, I think coming from the healthcare space and then coming from the business space and like merging them together, really helping women like step into their highest levels, high levels of productivity, getting off the hamster wheel of just feeling like there's never enough time, all of those types of pieces by leaning into their body's natural rhythms. So it's been a wild journey, like getting here. It was not where I started, but years ago, my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And I had 3 young kids. And I know for many of the entrepreneurs that we know and we work together, a lot of them want to create time freedom and they want to create life freedom and financial freedom and all of those things. And when I came face to face with my husband having the brain tumor and having 3 young kids, and I was working what I thought was my dream job, but didn't feel quite as satisfying as you thought it might be, kind of ventured out into that journey of entrepreneurship and found myself hustling my booty off, which I think many entrepreneurs do, and really reached this place of total burnout and wondering, like, I can't do this anymore. I'm wanting time freedom. I'm wanting to be with my kids more. And now I'm finding myself hustling even more. And so I'm like working my 9 to 5, coming home, hustling. My kids are growing up before my very eyes. Like I'm missing out on all of this. And along that way, stumbled across how women are just different. Women operate in this 24 or 28-day rhythm with our menstrual cycles, and men operate in a 24-hour rhythm, and how that became that was the gateway for me to learning like, oh my gosh, I wasn't meant to be on this like 24-hour hamster wheel every single day. Like I lean into my body, it changes the game. So that is a little bit about me, the journey now. Like I now work with business owners, like women who really want to create a business that feels good for them, that doesn't leave them to that place of burnout and hustling all the time, leans into those times when they know they're going to be super motivated, and other times when they don't want to get off the couch and they just want to watch Netflix, and letting go of the conditioning that that's a bad thing, that we have to be consistent all the time because women are not consistent. So that's just a quick snapshot.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to dive in here, but
yeah,
I think what really struck me about that is that the online space in particular it's shifting, but was very bro markety heavy. It's created by men in the tech industry for other men to have jobs. And so it was created on this idea of hustle. And even as somebody who is a man, I'm like, I don't want to hustle all the time. So even if you're listening right now and you're like, well, I'm not a woman, I'm going to shut this off. No, there's nuggets for you here in this about your own personal cycle, because I know that even men have personal cycles. Let's talk about the female cycle and how to understand your menstrual cycle and understand it so that you can feel balanced in your business, so you can feel good in your business.
Yeah. Well, so I think looking at like men typically have testosterone, and testosterone starts usually high in the morning and then kind of has these ups and downs as the day goes on, and then generally is lower in the evening You go to bed, you wake up, you've got a fresh dose of testosterone. Women have estrogen and progesterone that are very different in the way they function throughout the month. Instead of that everyday 24-hour rhythm, you have a low of both estrogen and progesterone at the very beginning of the month. And then estrogen climbs all the way up until peak around ovulation. And then it starts to dip, and then progesterone kicks in. And then, you have, then both of them decline, and you go into menstruation again. So women, generally that estrogen feels so good, right? Like that's when you're like, overcommit, you're like all excited, you're like, yes, I'll do that, and I can tackle that big project, and I'll do that, and I'll take on the world, and you feel motivated, start a new workout plan, start a new nutrition plan, like everything feels wonderful and great. And then when progesterone kicks in, you're like, I just don't have it in me. I suck. I'm the world's worst business owner. I'm the world's worst parent. Like, I can't do this. I'm so overwhelmed. Like, what the heck happened? And so when we have these two different dynamic like hormones at play, oftentimes what happens is people don't understand that that's what's happening. And so you might be scheduling things, like in that high estrogen phase, you might be putting a ton of stuff like, yes, I'll do that. I'll put that on my calendar. I'll got it. I'm like going to do this in that phase when you're going to have that low energy and not feeling really great and not feeling really wonderful and feeling like you're a failure. And you put it all in there, and then the time shows up and you're like, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. And so really learning and leaning into where those rhythms are allows you to actually stack your days, stack your month in those high zones when you feel really great. And in those other zones, when you don't feel that way, you lean into those too, right? So women I talk about them as 4 phases. So the first phase is your recharge phase. That's all it's for. It's like recharge. Like, let's focus on recharging you, filling your cup, making sure your battery's full. Everything is doing really great. Like you're taking time, maybe going for walks, like get off social media. Like that's my number one thing, get off social media during that phase and plan your month. Like set your intentions for what feels good for you, set your goals, align and be really proactive, like what's coming in that month. And then you move into that high estrogen phase, which I call the accelerate phase. It's all about like tackling big things, getting it off the ground. At the top there, where your estrogen's at its height, is around ovulation. Like physiologically, women's bodies are saying like, mate with me, like make a baby. Like that's what their body is signaling. Like, because biologically, their body is saying, like, this is the peak time I'd be making a baby. And so you're the most radiant, the most engaging, the most articulate. You can communicate the best. Like, you want to be with other people. It's the great time to do lives and, social media. I will record all of my reels, all of my videos, like everything in that 1 week because it's so much easier. You get it. It just comes so much faster. And it's like, those times when you've like recorded and you've recorded like 50 million times and you just keep erasing. It's like, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. In this phase, you don't do that. It's like one cut, done. It felt good. And so you have that phase. And then the last phase is your reflect phase. And this is what many women kind of describe as like PMSing, but it really is like a super emotional phase. So there's a lot of like heightened you get easily triggered, overwhelmed, like all those types of things. But it's also the best time to tap into limiting beliefs and fears and self-doubt and process all of that, let all that go so that then you can move into that next month and feeling really ready and primed and like you've moved up to that next level. So each phase has a specific intention, a different goal, right? Like it's got a core need that it's meeting within your body and within who you are. And we have to lean into each one of them or we're missing part of that each month. And so, yeah, like you said, men are going to have their own rhythm in the day, right? Like I know my husband, for a while, he would like come home from work and he would sit in the car for 20 minutes before he'd actually come in the house. And I'm like, really? I'm in the house with 3 kids and you're just sitting in the car. But that was his like recharge. Like he needed that recharge before he could come into the house and deal with the chaos of 3 kids. Right. So we all have those rhythms. We all have those core needs. It's about finding that rhythm for you because we are not made to hustle all the time. Right. We have a prime time when we can hustle and go hard. But then you need to retreat. You need to do that inner work. You need to do the reflective time. Like you need all these different components. It's like a balance. And for women, leaning into that menstrual cycle just makes sense. It just flows.
That does make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, do you like sort of map out your month based on this? So like, let's say you're going to do a launch, you're going to launch a product. Do you make certain that it's at a specific time of the month
Mhm.
so that you're at your optimum?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. So it has its own Google Calendar. So like in Google, like in the calendars, you can
Yeah.
toggle and have multiple calendars. It has its own. So, my cycle's not 100%. It's a little bit off like month to month, and most women's are. It's not usually like 100% the same every month. So it makes it easy just to kind of drag and move things around in there. But I definitely like I'm planning a launch coming up in the new year. And when I looked at when it's going to be, I make sure that it's going to be at one of those prime times. And when I'm going to be feeling good and feeling radiant, because I know I'm going to show up so much better for my people and show up so much better and help create much bigger impact when I'm in that peak zone than when I'm in that place of self-doubt and fear and worry and things like that. Like I'm not going to give them what they need in that phase versus when I'm in that confident, like, yes, we're changing the world here. This is amazing. Like, let's do this. Very different type of energy that you're putting out when you're doing that. So it's going to make it easier, get done faster. It's going to make bigger impact, all of that. So there are times when you aren't going to be able to make adjustments, right? Like everything in our lives are not going to match up with where our body's naturally primed at. And that's when even just knowing it, you adjust, you do different self-care tasks, you do, you adjust your schedule and say, you know what, this is a peak event. This is a peak thing that I have to do. I need to clear the rest of my calendar so that I have enough energy for that. It's kind of looking at how much energy management you have, right? So I described it in my last training, the last time I launched, and somebody said, it's like having spoons. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to use this analogy forever now, like going forward, where like, if you have a 4-spoon task, but your body only has 2 spoons, what generally people are doing is trying to force themselves to complete that 4-spoon task with 2 spoons of energy. And so they're either overextended, they're working too hard, and then they're just leaving exhausted. So what I help you do is like your body, if you were planning it, hopefully you've planned it accordingly so that you have your 4 spoons. Like you're planning the 4-spoon task at the time when you have 4 spoons. But if you don't, then the question becomes either A, how do we change the task to make it so that it's only 2 spoons? Or what do we do to help get you your extra 2 spoons that you need so that you have that energy? So it's looking at rather than just forcing yourself and overriding your body, it's how do we adapt so that your body can meet the demands of life and where you're at.
I love that
Yeah.
spoon, the spoonies. I
Yeah.
love that spoon
Yeah.
analogy because that's a lot of people in the fibromyalgia community use that. For
Oh,
their,
really?
yeah, like in terms of like their energy and how they're able to handle it and what they
Yeah.
need to do and adjust accordingly. So that really makes sense. So
Mhm.
this is a really okay. This is a really naive question. You just gotta go
Okay.
with it. I'm like, so let's say I'm an older woman who's past in menopause or beyond.
Mhm.
How does that cycle differ and how do they adjust with this
Yeah.
idea?
Well, I think it's not just people that are like maybe postmenopausal, but people that are pregnant or on birth control or have super irregular cycles, if you're in one of those boats, you might be having the same question. And what I have found is that all women have a very similar cycle. So I have clients who they're pregnant or have had a hysterectomy or postmenopausal, and they all notice kind of the same rhythm. So I personally, this is like, I can't scientifically prove it, but I believe that all women are still cycling in a 28-ish day cycle, regardless of whether or not physically you're menstruating or not. Like, I think women are just designed to operate in that way. And like I said, I've had clients that are like to the T. I mean, I had a pregnant client one time, and every time I got on the call with her, I could tell exactly where she was at based on the language she was talking and the doubts or the thoughts or whatever she was saying. I'm like, this is exactly where you're at. And she followed a very similar 28-day rhythm, even though her hormones were not that, right? Like when you're pregnant, progesterone's really high and that's your dominant hormone throughout the whole pregnancy, but she still functioned her life in that more 28-day rhythm and noticed it. And so I think if there's like more beyond what we could talk about, but like even my 6-year-old who I know is not hormonally adjusting, like, right? Like doesn't have progesterone and estrogen riding through her body. I noticed that same sort of a cycle with her, and I haven't tracked exactly if it's 28 days or ish, like a monthly cycle. There are some days she's the sweetest little angel. She's like wonderful. And other times she's like hell on earth. Right. And I think that that's just where, when we expand out and look, like we are human beings that have these variations and fluctuations. Like we are not an on or off switch. And when we start leaning into that rhythm, whether, even looking at like the year, like we have cycles and seasons, we have spring, summer, winter, fall, and the moon is in rhythm and the sun has its own rhythm. Like everything has its own rhythm. It's just a matter of like leaning into what is your rhythm and what does that look like. And for most women, generally across the board, they function best in that monthly rhythm.
Finding that really interesting. It's reminding me a lot of Ayurveda. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ayurveda, but
Mhm.
Ayurveda is the science of life. And it's
Yeah.
the old ancient wisdom of like sort of how to walk the planet, how to live your life. And it's based on cycles.
Mhm.
There's a daily cycle. There is the moon cycle that it's based on, and that's based for women, but
Mhm.
also men can follow it, but that's not designed for them, like you were saying.
Mhm.
A a year cycle and then a
Yeah.
life cycle. And it's about how you interact and how your energy and what your makeup and what you are made of coexist with that. And that's
Mhm.
basically what you're saying here is like going back to sort of the old natural cadence, the old natural rhythm that's actually innate within you. And when
Mhm.
you can use that, it sounds like you can be more productive, have more energy, be more creative,
Yeah.
scale your business, because of listening to that natural rhythm within you.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think we've been so conditioned just in society to not be in that rhythm, right? Like every day is the same, and we live in this world with artificial lighting and artificial, like we can adapt and make life whatever we want it to look like essentially at this point in time. But if we were to go back and live without all that technology and without all that stuff, like how in depth we could live with nature. And I think there's so many more cycles that we don't even know are happening, that are we're not even aware of. Like you, for me, I use Facebook memories, and I was looking at one year and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I for the last 6 years in a row, I've been sick the same week every single year." And I
Wow.
started paying attention to it. There was 2 weeks. There was one in November, which I think is actually probably because of the Halloween sugar high. Like, 3 weeks after Halloween, I get sick every year. I'm like, "Huh." And then the one in like early January or late January, February-ish, every single year I was getting sick. And so then it begs to question, like, is this a bigger cycle that I is like just part of the natural rhythm, or is there maybe a lifestyle habit like Halloween that's impacting my immune system and whatnot? But it's like I would never have noticed that before, that I get sick that same week every year over and over and over again. And so regardless of what the cycle is, I think there's so many more patterns and cycles in our world that we're not even attuned to.
And so how would you suggest to somebody to go about sort of tracking it or figuring it out? Because it sounds very like on one hand, it sounds super simple. It's like, well, follow your cycle. And then the other
Yeah.
hand, you're like, but how do I even know what mine really is?
Yeah. Well, in terms of menstrual cycle, I would highly recommend either using an app or using a paper tracker and just starting to track, and not just like, hey, I this is when I bleed, but like what is your energy level from day to day to day? Or what's your productivity level? Or are you noticing like, hey, I'm super triggered today, or I'm super emotional today, or I'm like eating my out my cupboard today, right? Like all of those different things, like even the how much sleep you need based on your estrogen and progesterone, like how much sleep you need is totally different. So women that set like a specific rigid schedule through the whole month, like you were not designed to sleep the same amount. And so even looking at that, like I'm extra tired, I need more sleep this day, and you start to notice those trends over time. So whether you use an app, I really like using Clue. I feel like that gives me a lot of data. I can put in like digestive habits, or mood and energy, and there's a lot of different categories that you can track, not just like most of them. The menstrual apps out there is like literally either trying to just help you prevent getting pregnant or helping you to get pregnant. They don't give you all that other data in terms of what your life is actually happening with. So I think that's one really helpful way, is to have just some tracker where you can start to notice trends over time. Because most women are not even tracking. Like I was actually surprised when I started in this area and talking with women, like most women have no idea when there's periods coming. They have no idea what's even happening between periods, right? Like the period's just the encore. The whole rest of the amazing stuff that's happening is that progesterone, estrogen shift and change. And people don't know that. They have no idea. And so really just starting to pay attention to those. And like, whether it's like, if you're a digital person, like find some digital app that works. Paper person, start tracking it by paper. Even now we have technology like the Aura Ring, the new Apple 8 watch, like all of these things can track it for you, but at least the like ovulation, like body part. So you can know like, hey, I just ovulated this week. Like, that's why I feel so amazing. That's why I feel great. That's why I feel like I'm high on life. And now I know maybe next week I need to like kick some stuff off my schedule, or I need to take it a little easy this next week, or it just gives you that extra level of awareness.
Yeah, I love all that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think no matter who you are, you can benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter where you are in your life, and particularly as a business owner, we have a lot of creatives and a lot of business owners in my audience. And I think being able to tap into that natural, as you said, rhythm, and when you begin to understand the patterning,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you'll be able to really take control of it ultimately and offer yourself the balance. Because I think that's probably the biggest
Yeah.
thing of all is balance. And so I wanted to get
Yeah.
your thought on what does balance even mean to you?
For me, I think the biggest thing is this balance is allowing yourself the permission to not be on all the time.
Mm,
That there's this element of like when I teach the phases of the month, I talk about like there's a need for recharging. There's a need for like feeling like you're fulfilling a sense of purpose and like pushing and doing something. There's a need for connection and human relation. And there's a need for tapping into yourself and your higher power and getting to know yourself. And so I feel like those are the four core needs we have as human beings. And they're met within the cycle when we lean into those four phases. And what I find is that a lot of women are dominant in one or two of them, and they're missing those other key elements. Like they're not paying attention to themselves and tuning into their inner core needs, or they're not giving themselves the rest and the break and recharging, or there's some imbalance in their neglecting one of those core needs. And so for me, balance really comes into making sure that we're giving your body and your soul and you as a human being and a person all of the components that make you thrive. So I would think that's what I would describe as balance.
that's really good.
Yeah.
That's really, really good. And I don't think I've really heard it said in exactly that way before of what you're not giving yourself what you need.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really key and really, really astute,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny because as we've been talking, I've been sitting here and I'm like, well, what is my cycle? Right? Like, what is my daily cycle? Because obviously it's within the 24-hour period. And then I was like, oh yeah, I used to call it Oprah time. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Oprah used to come on and I was like ready for a nap. Like that was the end of my, like the testosterone dipped. I was like, okay, I'm out. I'm laying on the couch. I have zero energy,
Mm-hmm.
to finish the day. And I have noticed that I don't tend to put anything after 4 o'clock on my calendar, even to
Yeah.
this day, because by the end of the day, I'm so worn out. I'm like, I'm done. I
Yeah.
have nothing left and I have to go recharge.
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes at 4 o'clock, I don't take a nap, but I go and I lay down in bed. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
lay down. I need to be down. I need to be laying down. So that is actually my cycle. That is,
Yeah.
and to really honor that, right?
Yeah.
I think there's been a part of me that has felt guilt or shame around needing that 4 o'clock lay me down.
Mm-hmm.
But you saying this is like giving me this permission of sorts. Do you find with people that they just sort of almost need permission because of the culture, because of the sort of way in which we live in the hustle world?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's one. So when I talk to women or like when they listen, they're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Like, this is why I felt this way. And it really does give them that permission to be like, okay, this is not me. Like, I'm not the one that can't keep it up, or I'm not the one that can't keep the energy or the momentum going. Like, it's my body's natural rhythm. So, like, it really does. It gives them permission to say, it's okay. Like, I can take the break, because it's not just I need the break. Like, you really do. And I live in Southern California and we have Teslas everywhere. So I oftentimes use a Tesla as an analogy of it goes incredibly fast. It goes super fast, super quick. Like it is powerful. But if you don't plug that thing in, it's not going anywhere,
Mm.
right? Like you can't run a charge or you can't run a Tesla without it being charged. And so, where in our society we've gotten this idea that we can run without ever being charged or that we can run without like stopping and refueling. I don't know where that came from, but we don't. We can't. We cannot keep going. Like that is what keeps us going towards burnout. And so, it really does. It creates this biological like component of I get the permission to fuel and take the time for my body and lean into what it's actually feeling rather than feeling like what I'm feeling is wrong and I need to force it to feel some other way.
And not only will it help your business, but your life and your health,
Yes.
right? Like think about the health, like the fact that you were like, oh, look, every year at this time I get this illness. But if you don't ever unplug, I mean,
Mhm.
rather, unplug and rest or plug back in that electricity, if you don't give yourself that time, you're just setting yourself up for illness
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I know a lot of women that come to me, they're like, "I have irregular cycles. My cycles are all over the place." And really probably a big part of it is because we're forcing a lot of women to live in that more masculine rhythm, right? Like our world operates more in alignment with that 24-hour rhythm. And so when that is causing biological stress, so cortisol goes high, they're in that fight or flight sort of response. And when you're in fight or flight, it's telling the rest of your body, like, run from the freaking lion, like, get out of here. And so it's not trying to have a balanced hormone cycle. It's not trying to help like normal digestion or weight loss or any of those other things, right? Like it's in focus on run. It's life or death right now. And so when we start to adjust and lean into more of that 28-day rhythm, oftentimes that cortisol decreases, the rhythms start to normalize, like everything starts to shift. And I think that is what most men and women need, right? Like we've got to get out of this fight or flight that so many people are in right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of
Yeah.
the reasons I'm such a proponent, obviously, of breath work, of meditation,
Mhm.
is that it moves out of that fight or flight. But I love this idea of cycles, and I love this idea of your natural rhythm and your natural cadence, and knowing and understanding your energetic patterning, so you
Mhm.
can be at your
Yeah.
optimal, your optimal you, and that you can not only is it good for you, but it's good for everyone. It's good for those in
Mhm.
your life, and it's good for your business. It's good for all of us
Yeah.
ultimately to live in that natural state, back to where
Yeah.
we came from ultimately,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I know that people are going to want to work with you
Yeah.
after hearing this. Where can they reach you? How can they find you?
Yeah. So we have the podcast, which is the Cycle Advantage podcast, where we really like lean into helping you use your cycle as your advantage. And then I do have a download that has my paper tracker, like cycle tracker that you can use. And it talks about like 3 ways your cycle is impacting life and business. And that is at reneefieck.com, cycle sync biz. Everywhere else, I am just Renee Fieck on TikTok, Instagram, wherever else you hang out. I'm probably there, but
All
those
the
are the
good
places,
places, all the
all
good
the good
places
places.
where you give good tips and fun stuff, which I've
Yeah.
seen.
Yes.
Um, anything that would make this conversation feel complete or whole, or anything else that you feel like called to share?
I know oftentimes people ask me like what's like the one of the biggest things that they could do right now. And I think the biggest thing, man or woman, or anywhere would be to just to ask like what does my body feel today, like what does my body need. And if we start asking that question and really tuning in, because I think so much of society has conditioned us to follow a certain diet, to follow a certain morning routine, to follow a certain exercise plan, like all of the things, like society has gotten really good about telling you what to do. And being in health being in healthcare, like I know everybody is different. We are not the same. Not like, what one person's doing is not good for everybody. And so really helping you get back to leaning in and tuning into what do you need? What does your body need? What does your person, your soul, what do you need? And starting to ask that question and really leaning into being okay with whatever that answer is can really change everything for you.
Love that.
Yeah.
That is such a similar philosophy to mine. Even when we talk about morning practice with my students, and it's always, what do you need? Not
Mhm.
what do I do?
Yeah.
Because what I do might not be right for you. It's individual. Look at me, look at me with the words today. I don't know my words.
What phase of your cycle are you in? No, I'm kidding.
Exactly. Well, it is 2:40, so we're getting to the end,
There
right?
you are.
There we
Yep.
go. So there you have it. Oh my gosh, this was great. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and being with us today in conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here. It was awesome.
Be sure to go to TikTok, go to Instagram, check Renee out, and give her the greatest takeaway from today's episode. And of course, DM me too while you're at it. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
See you on the next episode.